Okay.
Welcome to Untamed Inc. podcast. This is episode 4, and today me and Jasmine are really excited to dive right in and get going. So, by now, you should already know, I'm guessing, listeners, what the show is all about. And yeah, I'm just going to dive right into it today. Jazz, what was your Untamed moment this week?
Yeah. Hi, Alex. Um, Actually, you know what? I was thinking about this in the car on the way back home, and I think my untamed moment is a bit of an identity crisis. So,
Oh,
um, as you personally know, I went to the salon this morning just before we had our recording, and I I live in Dubai, and a majority of the service staff here are from the Philippines, and absolutely love them. Uh, and I absolutely love the staff at this salon. But when when I was about to leave, she looked at me and said, "You know, you kind of remind me of my daughter in the way that you look." And I had such a. This is not the first time that someone said that to me in the last 3 months. So on the way back home, I was having a bit of an identity crisis. So here's a Filipina, sorry, telling me that I look like her daughter. I'm If you didn't watch the last episode, I'm half Malaysian, half German. The last time someone said this to me was was a Turk. So I've been someone said that I look like her Turkish daughter, and then on the other hand, someone's saying that I look like her Filipino daughter, and I'm here just like I'm neither of those things, and I'm just having a little bit of a mental identity crisis basically, and that's my untamed moment.
that's so fun. Like you can literally just say different things to please different people. You can actually navigate so many social situations, if you actually do this.
But
Uh,
how mad is that? Like, oh no, oh, and also just a few weeks ago, I met this German guy who didn't believe that I was German until I said, "Oh, you know what? I've actually done a DNA test." Like, just context. My mum was born and raised in Germany, so I still believe that I'm German. But the DNA test said that I'm Austrian, and then he looked at me again, and he's like, "Oh yeah, you kind of look Austrian." What is going on in my life?
wow.
Oh,
That's crazy. It's like
absolutely mental.
constant fight for your
Yeah,
identity to prove to other
yeah. I
people.
just I just need to be comfortable with my Jasmine identity. I don't need to be either anything. I just need to be Jasmine. I need to be happy with that. And until that happens, I'm just going to be mentally untamed.
Yeah, just be feral. You should just give different identities just to confuse people even more. So if they go, "Oh, you look like Turkish," just go like, "No, I'm from Papua New Guinea" or something like that. Just like be really sarky about this kind of stuff. It'll just shut people right up.
Yeah, that would be absolutely hilarious. So that was my untamed moment. How
Wow.
about you, Alex? What was your untamed moment? You
So
gave me a bit of a hint, so I'm quite excited for this.
yeah, so basically I've got back into martial arts after very quite a few years, very excited. But it's not as bad as the other weeks, but what I would say is like it's quite a male dominated sport and there's some amazing female fighters, but because of my coach and because they have like an alter ego. So whenever I come into the gym, my alter ego comes out that I never had until this part of my life. And I'm like, yeah, like what's up? So I've started talking in such a male, like bro voice. And like even to my coach, I'm like, yeah, like that's cool. Like I start developing this husky, like from a chest voice. And I don't know, like this is my untamed. So recently, like my untamed moment, like nowadays in the gym, especially when I see my coach, I'm like, "Yeah, you ready for today?" Like, and I start talking, like I'm like, "What the hell, Alex? Where is this coming from?"
It's all that testosterone, probably.
Yeah, and I think like it's like, oh, like you want to like give off the same energy that person's giving
Yeah.
you. And it's really not like I'm totally going against like what I'm probably programmed to do as a woman. But I just do it and I don't know why.
Oh my God. Back in the day when you used to actually compete, did you have a fighter name?
No, it's just Alex.
Nice.
Like
Maybe you
that's
need to like channel
yeah,
your
I
alter
know.
ego.
I'm gonna have to. I've thought about this recently. I'm gonna have to have a fighter name because if I ever get to the point of fighting, I'm gonna have to have some sort of name and like channel that ego. But yeah, that masculine, rough, husky voice has started coming out, and it's the worst because it's like it's a fusion, and I'm learning like in this fighting culture, people really love hip hop, and then you have the whole hip hop
Oh,
like the lingo and like the kind of like yeah, like and I'm like okay, like. And for those that are listening, I love like all genres of music from rock, techno, metal, house, hip hop, but it's not predominantly hip hop. So I'm having this really weird identity crisis right now, too.
our untamed moment for this week is just identity crisis. Has nothing to do with our topic. Absolutely love it.
So
Well, we'll figure it out. We'll figure out the name of your alter ego as we go along.
I'm pretty excited for this formation down the line. So let's see. With that alter ego potentially coming into the mix, pause that for a second and let's just go into what's in store for today. So, Jazz, I'll actually ask you, what do we have in store for today?
So today is going to be a bit of a deep topic, and we'll be talking about we'll be talking about exposure, the mere exposure effect, sometimes known as exposure bias. But if you want to talk about the official term, it's called the mere exposure effect, and that is a type of cognitive psychological bias that we all have, where individuals tend to show a preference for things that they are more familiar with, so something that they have been exposed to more. And repeated exposure usually means more familiarity, and that means you like it more, even without consciously realizing it. And that is the meat and the potatoes for today.
Wow, great way of keeping it concise. And I'll just add to what Jazz is saying. So, to elaborate on the mere exposure effect, it's going to take me some time to say mere instead of just exposure effects. But this cognitive bias is so prevalent in everyone's lives, be it you're seeing a news campaign where your local, well, politician or even prime minister is campaigning for an election and you're hearing their name in the news, on the radio, online all of the time. And that repeated exposure might make you more in favor for voting for them or breed a sense of familiarity. It could be an advertisement where you're seeing a certain discount in the supermarket promoted all of the time or on the TV. It could be a song, a chart song you're listening to that's in like the top 100. And that song is constantly being playing on all different platforms and mediums, which makes you more prone to selecting or choosing that in a nutshell. And this mere exposure effect, not only does it make you more familiar with a certain object, person, topic, whatever, it also can have a powerful effect on your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and it can drive so many changes in your day-to-day life.
Yeah, we've both experienced that in our lives, haven't we? But just bringing it back to music, for some reason, this doesn't when it comes to me exposure effect, it doesn't really affect me personally. No matter how many times I hear Taylor Swift, I don't actually like Taylor Swift. I,
Ah,
I
okay, there's actually a theory on this, which we will go into. With music, it's a touch and go. It's not always
yeah,
true. with music. So, in order to explain this, I'll dive into the history of the mere exposure effect. So,
Yee.
because basically, this came about in 1968, this bias by a guy called Robert Zajong, where he suggested a relationship between exposure and liking. And he basically originally conducted a study in the US in Michigan where he gave students a range of Chinese characters that they did not know and very unfamiliar, and recorded the reactions, the emotional reactions of each character. And in short, he found students had preferences to ones that were more repeated and familiar, and so per se. And he also reviewed Zedong three other studies, and there's more studies in today's times to back this theory, this bias up. But he also did three reviews of major studies by other people on word frequency and evaluation, interpersonal contact and interpersonal attraction, and third, music selection and liking, which brings me on to this topic you just mentioned. So, Jazz, let's go and discuss all three in some more order today.
Do you want to start with music? You want to tell me why that's
Yeah, because
it didn't really work?
we're actual music buffs. So let's dive into this. So music, there was studies he investigated from the 70s by a guy called Harrison in 1977, and shown that people with low in intermediate frequency, like music with the like lowest frequency, tends to
Mm,
be the best liked, which you and I think it'll back up our music choice.
yeah,
However, there also are studies that that if music's played from four or more times, are more likely to decrease. Like it's a mixed bag, but with
yeah.
music, it's showing like it's actually the opposite. The people that are exposed less to unfamiliar music are more likely to rate it higher and like it. So I think it's a really complex topic we're talking about today, but the reason it's called the mere exposure effect is because it's not always what you're exposed to. It is like a direct influence. It's sometimes or caveats which can stop you being
Mm,
influenced. And this is actually part of something called the saturation effect. So when you're
mm,
exposed to something too much, you tend to dislike it instead of liking it. So with music, it's actually showing very different. So if you're played too much, like Taylor Swift, or for me it was Rihanna's that Umbrella song, like I cannot stand it, but it actually shows that people dislike it. So
yeah.
that really backs up what you're saying.
Oh, that's fair enough. So I think just looking into it previously and before the show, um, that's a really interesting thing about the music. And I think actually, like I'm going to say this live, that will be something that will be a really interesting topic for us to dive into. I've always wanted to study like the psychology of music and why different people have different preferences, and then just like building into the fact that music specifically um, doesn't isn't really greatly affected by the mere exposure effect. That's going to be so fascinating to dive into. But I think in general, the mere exposure effect, there's a sort of like curve. So the more I don't know in which direction this video is gonna like flip me, but basically like the more you're exposed, the more you like it. But then there's a point, and it depends on different things. When you hit that point and you get exposed to it more, the curve kind of falls down. So exactly as you said, the more that you're exposed to something, it doesn't necessarily mean that you will like it as more the more that you're exposed to it, which is why the mere is so important. Um, and yeah, that was the bit that I wanted to add to that, the little drawing of the curve.
That's so relevant though with music, and it is a topic for another time. But definitely, it's like all the songs getting in popularity, reaching the top 100, top 10, and then like slowly making their way out. But music is such a I think it's such a controversial subject, and there's so much
Mm,
data to talk about. I think it's a topic for another time. And because we're talking about the mere exposure effect, and I want to highlight the familiarity term, let's talk about the two other parts of the mere exposure effect that Zhejiang was looking into. So there was word frequency and word evaluation, and interpersonal contact and interpersonal attraction. And interpersonal contact tends to be the most talked about in the mere exposure effect in interaction, let's say. So he found out that, looking at other studies, that people who physically are close to each other are likely to become into repeated contact, often become friends. And there tends to be a correlation between familiarity and liking for individuals and groups, which brings me on to our experience. How does that relate to your life?
Oh God. So, I feel like, or in general, I believe that when it comes to interpersonal relationships, I'm not very fussy with the type of people that I'm friends with, simply because I grew up in a sort of multicultural society and I am from a multicultural family. So I've been exposed to all sorts of different people and all sorts of different backgrounds. Um, so that's one aspect for it. But then on a deeper, more personal side, there have been quite a few experiences that I've had where um, I I believed I'm not gonna I'm gonna be probably very vague, but I believe that I was in good positions at work, and um, and I always tried to make sure that I put myself out there, sort of. I made sure that I had interactions with the right people. I made sure that I, you know, in terms of like team leads, I was, always had time with them. And what I realized is that always went in my favor. But then there was this one instance where I went from talking to my boss on a weekly basis, and that then reduced because there was a replacement, say, for my position. And as the exposure to me was reduced and the exposure to this other person was increased, I felt like there was a bit of a strain on the relationship, and communication styles started to change. Communication, like, I don't know if you want to say vibes started to change as well. And the more that went on, I noticed that happening, and I tried to put myself out there again and make sure that I still had that exposure. But unfortunately, what I've also discovered is that virtual exposure is not as powerful as physical exposure. So this other person had physical exposure with my boss, whereas I had only virtual exposure. And that makes such a big difference. And I know, I can't pronounce his name. Was it Zajon or
Yeah,
Zajonk
yeah, it's something like you're along
or
the lines.
Zayonk?
Zayong.
Butchering. Sorry. That was like back in the 60s, almost 70s. So it would be really interesting to see that sort of, with the virtual world that we live in now, um, how like that has changed things, if that makes sense. Because now with the internet, we can be exposed to people, all sorts of different people from all sorts of different backgrounds, all virtually. But because we are human beings, and unconsciously we have all these things that are coming off of us, all the hormones and all the like pheromones and all that stuff that we aren't exposed to on a virtual when we're on a virtual level. I wonder if that changes things as well. So we're not going to dive into that today, but that's like food for thought, isn't it? Oh God. Isn't it?
Well, we're not going to dive into it today, but I also think my own 2 cents before I look at modern day research is like, I don't think it's relevant to virtual nowadays because we have so much content and so many people coming in. Like,
Mm,
definitely physical, my opinion, beats virtual. And I've experienced the same, and not necessarily in the remote setting, in person setting, but I do think but I have actually, but in a different context. But I do think that it's a cause for concern. Let's put it that way.
mm,
Because the people who do the exposure effect, immune exposure effect, they consciously know what they're doing to breed
mm,
familiarity and preference. And that can also translate to like not even just the work setting, it can translate to like personal relationships. Say if you have know someone who's in a relationship and there's some influence out there and that person wants to become more influence or attract more attention from a committed person, let's say like that, and they want to become more familiar and like try and find ways to get in their life or this, it could be anything. It could be like to the point of like recruiting someone. It's just so prevalent and it's so powerful and it's quite scary because the person, I think that it's again, it's like the tall poppy syndrome. There's the perpetrator and then there's the victim.
yeah,
People consciously know. Well, I think with this, they consciously know what they're doing. They really do.
yeah. When you brought up interpersonal relationships, I just thought about the like 5 different friendships that fell apart during COVID because of
There's so many like in my life that's happened because of this.
yeah,
And at the end of the day, it's kind of the same whether it's the work, whether it's this. You don't want to fight what's going on because you kind of get a sense and you have your own dignity and own respect.
mm,
But at the same time, you just rather that be cut off that
yes,
relationship instead of being like, you know, like just hanging on to because of this mere exposure effect. But the problem is the person who's being it's affecting, they don't know what's happening, so they cannot manage the relationships until
mm,
eventually you have to wait till time runs its course and then they choose that person they're being more familiar with over the person they're pushing aside.
yeah.
And it's horrible
Ooh,
because it's horrible because you know what's happening,
yeah.
like
And
you kind of get
and
an idea.
yeah, you know what's happening. You can see that it's happening, and it's really painful. Uh, it's just yeah. Long and the short of it, like when things like this happen, it's a sense of loss. So whether it's ours, you know, personal situations with friendships, or I don't know if you've had it in the professional realm as well, but when, like, as I was explaining just a couple of minutes ago, in that position professionally, that was quite painful as well. It's a sense of loss, and yeah, there's all these kind of like little things that happen because of this cognitive bias, and it, you know, it affects everyone involved, similar to tall poppy syndrome, whether consciously or unconsciously, you know.
And it's actually really hard to deal with that loss even in the workplace because it's really hard, let's put it that way. And I think also it's one of those biases where people know what they're doing, but also I don't know if you've been on the receiving side where the flip side where you're exposing yourself to that person without. So I've been in a situation, I am being careful what to say in the professional sense, but I've been in a situation where I was hired for something and great job, relationship with the employer. Other people were hired to take part in this project, and I really liked working on this project. But because I was in communication quite a lot to relay information, do things, understand the deliverables, etc., that person tended to develop more of a preference towards me
Mm,
and push aside those 2 other people, which was not my intention. And
mm,
because of which you feel terrible at the same time because
Yeah.
that's not you. But
Mm.
again, it's the familiarity side.
Yeah. I can't I
So
can't think of an example off the top of my head where that has happened, but yeah, it kind of sucks, doesn't it?
it sucks on both sides, and it sucks on both sides. Now, again, this topic is a topic for a longer episode. We'll have to do a part two of this because it's so in depth. But another one, Zayong, Zayong, like
We'll figure it out. Sorry in advance.
was word frequency and word evaluation.
Mm.
So he actually found out that dirty words had higher recognition thresholds than neutral words, and from reviewing a study, and another one was that infrequent words have higher thresholds for recognition than frequent words, which is
Mm.
really interesting because the mere exposure effect, I think it tends to be more on familiarity with people in contact, because actually it makes sense with words. It's like music. Like when I'm copywriting, the words that kind of, oh, it's a double edged sword. This is what I don't understand with words. If I'm writing something on a landing page, something unique or like out of the box can really stand in the mind, but so does repetition.
Mm.
So it's a
Yeah.
really weird. It's a weird one.
Yeah, I think like I'm thinking of those situations where someone just speaks normally and then suddenly they use a big word and then
Yeah.
like all you can think about is that big word and you're like, "Ooh, that's a big word." Like that's a really good word. Um oh, I can't this recently happened. It's so funny, but I can't remember the specifics of it, and that just happened to me. Well, I was just like, oh, if I was speaking in that situation, I wouldn't use the big words, but that is a really good use of the big words. I'm so vague. I'm so sorry, but like I think you might understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah, no, totally agreed. There's many speakers I've seen, and they throw a massive amount of like intense vocabulary, and it really sticks in my mind. And even like, for example, like if you've ever seen some of the Oxford or Cambridge debates, or like
Mm,
very big politicians, like one of my favorites is this Indian one called Shashi Tharoor, and basically comes out with some like amazing words, and these words just they indent in my mind, and I think, how can I use this myself? What does this
mm,
mean? And it stands out. So it kind of correlates with this with the music, which is very interesting. So I would really say, like, looking at Zion's studies that he's reviewed, and I need to look at more modern day studies. I apologize, disclaimer, that I've not done enough homework on the modern research of this. However,
To
if
be
I were,
fair, like I tried looking into modern research as well, but because the onset of stuff like social media has really only kicked off in the last 15 years, I'm not surprised that there isn't really much to look for. But if anyone's interested in psychology, if you're studying psychology and have found more recent studies, feel free to share them with us, and we'll be more than happy to read those.
and sharing that part too. But if I had to put it down today to the mere exposure effect, I think it would be mainly contact and interaction, because the other
Mm.
two are contradictory to what the mere exposure effect is.
Yeah, there's a really good example, isn't there? Oh, well, I can think of two, and one that you're probably familiar with. So, uh, sorry to break anyone's bubble, but Santa Claus never used to always be red. And the only reason why we associate Santa Claus now with the color red and Christmas with the color red is thanks to Coca-Cola. Previously, I can't remember, you might need to correct me, Alex, but I can't remember exactly when the ad came out, but previous to this Coca-Cola advertisement, Santa Claus was always like green, and he matched the color of the elves. So elves always stayed green after that, but Coca-Cola ad, the first ever one, Santa Claus with a big bushy beard. He's big and jolly, and he's just wearing red. And ever since then, the more people were exposed to this Coca-Cola advertisement, the more that association just stuck in our minds. And I find that so interesting. And to be fair, that's like true. If you look at previous or like old school German Dutch stories about Santa Claus, aka Saint Nicholas, he's never worn red. So that I found that absolutely fascinating. And then another example, breaking it back to music because we love music so much. I don't know if you've watched the movie Easy A with Emma Stone.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's a scene where she gets a card from her grandma, and when she opens it, it plays Pocket Full of Sunshine.
Oh, okay.
And when she first opens it, she goes, "Ugh, I hate that song." But then she keeps opening it, and then that entire scene is basically her like continuously exposing herself to the song, and she becomes more, she likes it more and more. So that whole thing, and then it ends, I think it ends up, I haven't watched this in a while, I think that scene ends with her like breaking into song in the shower. She's like, I got a pocket full of sunshine, like that entire scene is all about that. uh, and yeah, so like that's two examples, and I'm pretty sure anyone who watched that movie just got so stuck in their head. And even watching this now, and I'm sorry, not really, because that's a banging song. So happy.
I love Natasha Bedingfield, so
Oh,
yeah.
she's so good.
So first of all, yes, I know about Coca-Cola. St. Nicholas used to be, I think, green. And that's
Mm,
what's so crazy that they had the power to change Santa's identity. That's so crazy.
yes.
And also, Easy A, I've never looked into it like that with Emma Stone, but it makes sense. I think songs are also programmed nowadays, composed psychologically to be catchy and stick in people's heads with certain riffs or certain lyrics to make it a hit. And it's a lot of basically it's like it's everywhere,
Yeah.
everywhere, and you'll be influenced without you even knowing. And even like it's just, oh, it's another topic for another time. I'm really conscious because this could go on for, it could be a 4 hour discussion about mere exposure
Absolutely.
effect today. So going on, I'm just diving right into this. So I mentioned earlier, it's called the mere exposure effect. So while it's everywhere, whether you could be in the supermarket, whether it could be on the news, whether it could be Santa Claus, whether it could be some sort of, you could want a take out tonight or takeaway, and you never know. You could have seen a discount advertised on TV from like Marks and Spencers for a meal deal of like a Chinese meal deal, and you might want a Chinese food tonight. It could be that level of like influence, very very subtle, and you're not knowing. But it's not always there. There are
Mm,
some. It is very powerful, but there are some limitations that stop this. One I mentioned, which was saturation, is like if it can lead to boredom or dislike if you're exposed to something too much rather than increased liking, and it can obviously make people wear out and fed up of it. And I
mm,
think there's a lot of things that you can probably think of that you've been exposed to and then you've got like so sickened by. Also there's context dependence. That means like the effectiveness can vary depending on the context.
mm,
So for example, like what might resonate with you about, like, say for example right now, like it's Biden versus Trump. Sorry to talk about politics here, but I'd rather talk about US than my own politics, my own countries. That could be very relevant on someone in the US, but in terms of us, we may not be influenced because there's different, it's a cultural context coming into play, or there could be like generational, it could be gender based, there could be work based. There's so many different contexts that might block out that mere exposure effect from you being influenced. Jazz, do you want to jump in on this if you think there's anything else that you want to, with the caveats to this?
In terms of caveats, yeah, I think it's also really context dependent. There's so many different things nowadays. Uh, I suppose it's slightly, I don't know. Um, you brought up politics, but I want to just touch on it, just in a parallel thing. When it comes to like news, we care a lot more about the news that gets repeated, um, and not so much on, even if it's like the other piece of news is more important objectively. Um, like what if it's not in our face, we don't really care much about it. So when it comes to like poverty or wars or whatever like news thing that they can sensationalize, they will do that and they will continuously repeat it. But then we never really hear much about corruption. We never really hear much about like when, oh, this is a really good one. So when like a news source makes a mistake, right? More people know about the wrong information rather than the news source admitting that they've made the mistake, because more people would have been exposed to the false information rather than the correction or the, we messed up. But so it's stuff like that that I feel like also relates to this.
For sure. I think definitely news publications are so conscious about the headlines to promote and the ones to push aside. Like, there's so many cases. Oh, again, another topic for another time, but especially with Western news, there's a lot of cases like, oh, this news is so big in the West, but if it was in this part of Asia, it's not getting the limelight because it's not pushed to the forefront. And it's circulated in so many different ways. And I just think headlines and news in local level news, or it's, let's put it this way, newspapers really know what they're doing in terms of advertising and promoting what news and choosing what to push to the forefront of the front page or the main topics on social media in the other side. And I think out of all of the people in the world, like those in the press really, really use the mere exposure effect to their advantage. And they're very master manipulators of this. But again, I'll just quickly recap mention the other, highlight the other ones of the caveats. So again, context dependent. Also, there's individual differences which kind of parallel with context. And I think again, competing factors, it can all, okay, so this can also like interplay with how you can beat the mere exposure effect. Is it can be offset by other factors, like influenced by your pre-existing attitudes and associations or cognitive processing. So if you
Yeah.
carry like strong self-awareness and strong attitudes towards things, you might not be as prone to being influenced or directed by that, whatever's being you're exposed to.
Yeah, this long and the short of it, it is really effective, but there are other things that can play into the effectiveness of it. But that when it comes to like, even when it comes to individual factors, for example, if you lived in, I don't know, rural Texas for a majority of your life and you're only exposed to a specific type of people, when you go out into the big world, it's kind of like a culture shock at first, but then mere exposure effect, right? But this also goes two ways. So the more that you're exposed to other people or from other cultures and all that stuff, the more you get used to it. But whether you really like them or not is context dependent on your experiences with those people. All these things like kind of link together as well. It's so interesting.
It is really interesting because at the end of the day, you could adopt those habits of the other people, but you'll still have your opinion about those people and about your lifestyle, yet abide to the standards and the norms of what they follow, but yet
Yeah.
not necessarily agree to those. It's so weird. Like, there's so many different avenues this topic can go off to.
Yeah. It's crazy. But yeah, so Alex, why don't you sum this up?
So, to recap, the mere exposure effect occurs just through exposure alone, so without any other factors like learning, association, or opinions conscious evaluation. It happens when you are exposed to a stimulus, person, article, a dog. Like, it could be in, sorry. Thinking off the top of my head, yeah, it happens when you're exposed to a stimulus, and
Ginger cats.
the more you tend to be exposed, you develop a preference for it. And then it increases, like, based on the level of exposure you have. So the more you're exposed to something, the more of a preference you have. And often this happens subconsciously. You're not
Hmm.
consciously aware of what's happening and why you're developing more of a liking to that stimulus.
Yeah, I think like unconsciously more often than not, but sometimes the person doing the exposure can make it very obvious that they're trying to like put themselves in a situation of repeated exposure, and I can kind of relate this to haven't been in the space for a very long time, but when it comes to like dating, you kind of want to expose yourself more to that person. I've heard situations.
You know what? I was going to talk about that today, but I'm not going to. It's a topic for another time. However,
Yeah.
I definitely won't say I've not done this in the dating game. Exposing myself to make myself more likable. I think we're all victim of this. And even applying, yeah, that's another topic for another time. I'm not going to go on to my behaviors of deploying purposely the mere exposure effect on people that I've dated. So,
So yeah.
go on.
No, I'm just like I'm so interested in hearing that story.
I cannot talk about this. It's a
We'll,
topic for
we'll
another
take it
time.
off air.
But
You
it's
need to
very
you need to
calculative
spill the
behaviors.
tea. We'll take this off air. You need to tell me this offline. But so, do you reckon that there are I don't know, like cures or solutions to beating the mere exposure effect?
Well, there's no solution as per se. I think it's just increasing awareness of what the effect is, being more mindful that you can be influenced based on your exposure. Also, I would suggest going out of your way, becoming more uncomfortable,
Hmm.
exposing yourself to new situations, objects, or unfamiliar stimuli that might in the future stop you being over dependent or reliant or influenced by the exposure effects. So basically trying new things and being open-minded to other things. And then also having a critical evaluation. So taking time to consciously reflect on why you like or dislike something, and instead of just being familiar, because that self reflection can help you make wiser and smarter decisions in the future. So it could be like writing a list of pros and cons. It could just be like really thinking about boiling it right down to the simplest point of why you like this or why you don't like this, because that becomes a more you're more in tune and more aware with yourself, basically.
Mm.
So that's what I would say.
Yeah, fair enough. That's a
So in short, I'd say stay wise and aware. Don't believe everything you see or hear.
that's yeah, yes, or here. And what a lovely place to end this episode. We did good. We're less than an hour.
Woo!
Sorry about how chaotic this was, but I hope everyone has learned something today and look forward to seeing if people share their own experiences. If you have any of note, let us know in the comments. And looking forward to hearing all of your experiences. Any final words?
Stay vigilant.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.